All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Adam Derrick. I'm a senior sales solution engineer at Jamf.
And I'm Dave Cedar, Specialist Solutions Architect at AWS for EC2 Mac. And we're here to talk about compliant Mac workloads in the cloud. So we're going to go over today what a cloud Mac is, how it's different, and really how to go about properly securing something like this, considering everything about it. So just to start, what is a cloud Mac? And I've always made the joke that the cloud is someone else's computer, and in some ways that's right, and in some ways it's a little different. A cloud Mac is a Mac that is, in our case, AWS's data centers, and is not just, it's a Mac Mini or a Mac Studio that's hooked up to Thunderbolt for storage and networking. So you can actually raise the things like performance of disk or just the size, of course, and using the Elastic Block Store. So this is sort of, instead of saying, okay, I've got an SSD and that's the end of it, we introduce a little bit more of what's the right word for that?
Like robustness?
Robustness. That is a good word. I appreciate that. I'm going to say I don't think it's going to go get an underline. So Amazon's been doing other cloud stuff for a very long time, and they do a lot of it. There's over 850 instance types as of my last checking, and today we are literally talking about 5 of them. So this is what led to the why have a Mac in the cloud in the first place, and it came down to app development. If you're familiar with continuous integration, continuous deployment, CI/CD, this is where you see this sort of cycle where you could write your code anywhere. You can design your assets in any way, and that development can be done ahead of time. But if you want to sign that app, if you want to test it properly and get that out to the App Store or just to your users, that does require a Mac. Xcode runs on macOS. macOS runs on Apple hardware. So having access to Xcode also means having access to the ability to build on the App Store as needed. I always say this is my favorite picture because it's got a whole bunch of wires on it, and I love that. I'll point out too, this black box up here is also incorporating a robot finger in this model. So when it comes time to do firmware updates or force shutdowns, there's actually a little that occurs via electricity. So today the 5 types of instances, there's one that is kind of the original Mac 1 instance, which is an x86 Mac, Mac Mini, and Mac 2, which we didn't know what the M1 would be called. They don't, obviously that's not something they tell everybody. So Mac 2 is M1, but Mac 2 is also representing anything Apple Silicon. So Mac 2 M2, Mac 2 M2 Pro, M1 Ultra. And those all come with varying RAM complements, including that Mac Studio 128 gigs. So if you have a RAM heavy workflow or just need to test that way, it's out there. And that this is something that's definitely not trying to sell at you, but just to understand sort of how some of the billing works on this, because anytime you get sort of a something I guess newer, you may end up in a situation where it's like, okay, what happened on this bill? These are billed as dedicated hosts, there's a minimum 24-hour allocation period, and that comes from Apple's software license agreement. Without that though, basically outside of 24 hours, it is billed by the second, and you can release it whenever you're able to, and that's when billing stops. There's also savings plans, stuff where you can say, I think I need a Mac always on for 3 months or so, or however long. Or most of our customers really kind of mix that, where it's like if we know we're going to need this many, and sometimes we need this many. It's nice to be able to just say, okay, I'm only going to scale up when needed, and be able to do that in code. So to take a look at the partnership between AWS and Jamf, I'm going to bring that to Adam.
Yeah, absolutely. The partnership between AWS and Jamf is a pretty cool partnership. It started in 2022 at JNUC in San Diego. So that was our first user conference back from the pandemic. We were the first to integrate the enrollment for the EC2 Max. And a real pretty cool thing was David Brown, who's the VP for Amazon EC2, he joined our keynote, as you can see up here on the screen. Anybody in the room using the Jamf AI assistant? Okay, maybe we got some people online, but the fun little fact, Jamf AI, it runs on Amazon Bedrock, So AWS Verified Access, it's ensuring that your staff can only access those EC2 Max from a secure and compliant device. So this ties in with our Jamf Security Cloud as well to give you a kind of like conditional access device compliance type setup.
So yeah, when it comes to what do you do with a Cloud Mac, because that definitely should be a question. You don't just sort of, I mean, some of us will just go out and buy a Mac because we want another Mac, but that's definitely something you don't need to do in the cloud because you can actually get one on demand. What we see the most of really is, we mentioned CI/CD earlier. This is really built for that. There are things that are in, that are embedded, things like Homebrew is pre-installed, and plugins for things like Jenkins, so that this can be, rather than just sort of, okay, I've got a Mac in, Mac somewhere and point an IP address, there can be an entire sort of orchestration that happens rather than the manual work that might go into it. And number two, there we go. Number two is really more about testing. This is one that I think is honestly, this is when I first, I started AWS 3 years ago. And when I first started, this was actually the first thing I thought of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, who loves to test on actual physical hardware? It's nice to actually be able to test and just rewind back 15 minutes if we made a mistake. So yeah, having like that general purpose testing machine, being able to do things with packages, packaging is always fun, workflow testing. And then you also got other things like, Jamf Connect and privilege escalation. That one always gets me. I always want to say privilege elevation, but privilege escalation.
Escalation.
So, yeah.
So yeah, how is a Cloud Mac different from a regular Mac? Don't worry, it's not too much. Just going over one thing, enrollment is, this is definitely the room to be talking about enrollment too. And enrollment in this case, you're primarily going to, we introduced first agent enrollment back at that JNUC 2022. And since then have coded up user-initiated enrollment, so profile-based enrollment, which results in that Mac being supervised, being able to push the profiles, push MDM commands to that. And most recently, added some experimental support for account-driven device enrollment. And that's definitely, it's a very different flow, but it's also one that we've been able to automate. So this is a way to get, if you're not necessarily open to opening up the API for user-initiated enrollment, using something like ADDE may be that better option where you keep the control over those IDs. And reprovisioning. The word imaging is there, and it's not a misprint. Imaging is undead in the cloud. That's my usual line. So with imaging, basically, you can lay it down kind of like you used to. Say, okay, I want this software. I'm going to run this version of the operating system, and save that into an AMI, an Amazon Machine Image. Once that's saved, you can go and say, okay, I'm going to take that, launch a new instance, and that's going to have exactly the same data. It's going to have the same TCC permissions. It's going to have a whole lot of things Of course, one thing it doesn't have, because if it's moving from hardware to hardware, it doesn't have a device signature, but there is code included in this either to correct that or basically to process that enrollment during the boot up process rather than that happening kind of as a pre-thing. So, oh yes, really. I forgot. I wanted to make sure people knew. And we were talking about access also as well with the GUI, getting to the Jamf Connect screen. Out of the box, SSH keys are used here, and this is going to SSH or EC2 Instance Connect as well. These can get you access even just straight from the web browser. And going across that, a few commands, you can have VNC access. You're able to do screen sharing, Apple Remote Desktop, and there's actually some stuff beyond that too, where we're seeing HP Anywhere. Formerly a company called Teradici. They had basically something that's kind of cool and does compressed video, audio, and just a little better on latency. Parsec is another one that does that, and the Citrix word is also on the block as well. So if you do have that Citrix infrastructure already, it may make sense to kind of take a look at this and say, okay, this is possibly an addition to that. So the profile is slightly different. I'm not going to go over absolutely every difference. We mentioned ADE is not the flow that we're going to be using here. The two other biggest ones, and this is sort of I never want to get gotchas out there. Number one, File Vault. It sounds really, really sacrilegious to say don't put File Vault on a computer. And I'm definitely going to say that EBS is something that can be encrypted by default, encrypted using a key that you control, and also that encryption is AES 256. So that's the same standard that Apple is setting for the key of File Vault rather than the entirety of the disk, which is AES 128. So typically in a situation where we're talking security, we're going to have some sort of equivalent, if not something a little bit encryptier. Again, we're going to make some words up here. And I'll mention one other thing too. There is a system extension that is the driver for our network driver. And I'm definitely chief of breaking things when it comes to EC2 Mac, because I just want to do that before everybody else. And this was, I'd found that the system, it's possible to push a system extension profile. It would be good to make sure that that has either our identifier, and this we do have on a repo as well, the identifier or the development team ID in order to run, because otherwise it just basically kicks it off the network. And that's a little challenging for something that's not that's a bit cloudy. So I am going to mention too around usage, the Apple software license agreement, again, cover to cover. Learn every language. It's good in every one. It's seriously worth the read. 24-hour minimum is in there. Maximum of 2 virtual machines as well. The stuff that we've been talking about, that EC2 Mac, is bare metal. It's not a virtual machine running. That means that you can actually run virtual machines, though. So if you wanted to bring in something like UTM, you could do that. Tart and Virtu Anka, they have AWS Marketplace entries, so it can be as simple as kind of a one-click setup that way. And basically, a Cloud Mac is not necessarily the right solution for everything. If you have folks that are doing stuff like video editing, there are things that are getting better, but a lot of folks do want to make sure that they're doing they have that responsiveness to their work, and even then it's a very personal machine, I feel like, when it comes to creative. It's not really made to be kind of like a day-to-day workstation. This is made to kind of to do work and more of either an as-needed basis, or to have something that that's accessible and really easy to undo in the case of people like me that break things. I can unbreak it in about 15 minutes, and I don't have to do anything other than just wait for it.
Go grab a cup of coffee and come back.
Yep.
So, why are we doing this, when it comes to compliance in the cloud? So there's a couple different reasons that, security generally doesn't like developers using a whole bunch of Mac minis just sitting in a broom closet somewhere. So it's not just having like oversight and control. It's also being able to prove and validate that these devices are being used, that they're being used by the correct owners. And most importantly, to prove that they're not being used for anything outside of the targeted use case. It pretty much allows us to ensure that nothing's being compromised and all that fun stuff that comes with it. So these machines are generally going to be used for very, very specific workflows. So Dave mentioned it's not going to be used as your primary driver. So since they're being used for those very specific workflows, it's likely to contain out of not normal account privileges that a standard end user machine may not have. So just setting these controls to the side, it's not always enough. So you need to be able to validate that they're in place, and also ensure that your machines are only being used for those purposes which they're intended to be used for. So Jamf has a term that we use. We call it trusted access. And essentially, trusted access is how you should approach management and security. It's not just one product. It's an approach that we have that leverages a couple different tools out there to ensure that you have everything that you need to meet that trusted access criteria. So at the end of the day, trusted access is ensuring that only authorized users on enrolled devices that are secure and compliant have access to that sensitive data that we might be using and testing on these EC2 Macs. So when it comes to security, obviously the first thing that has to happen is we need to go ahead and enroll the device. Once that device gets enrolled, we're going to automatically configure that device post-enrollment through things like config profiles and policies and all the fun stuff that Jamf has to offer. From there, we're going to make sure that that device is secure. We're going to prevent any unnecessary or unwanted threats. We're ensuring that we know who's using the device. So is that person who they say they are, who's using the device? And then we're controlling what that device can have access to through things like ZTNA. So Cyber Essentials has a really good selection on secure development and deployment guidance. Essentially, do you trust the devices on which code is being written? Yes, no. So this applies not only to just your developer workstations, but everything that's in the pipeline. Yeah, you could find that article out online. I don't think there's a QR code for it.
Yeah. There's no QR code. That's
Yeah.
a very
Yeah,
long.
but
That's a very long URL.
It's out on ncsd.gov. If you Google it, you'll be able to find it. So I'm sure we're also uploading these slides. So,
yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Essentially, Cyber Essentials, they're a company that they set the standards for standards. Cool. Compliance benchmarks in Jamf Pro. So do you want to take this one, or?
I'm not just gonna. It's I can definitely. I want to dive in because who's out of this room? Any macOS Security Compliance Project in general? Who's familiar with it? Awesome. I will admit it was. I think it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. I can't remember exactly when, but it was here that actually I got my education in the SCP, and it's one of those things that just it's been really cool because you can also see in something like CIS level 2, which we were talking about, how there is potential for somebody to have a bad idea and implement absolutely every switch in there, and not necessarily. Some folks have more tolerant users than others. But with this the Security Compliance Project, this is coming from standards. Jamf actually did release the I think it was Jamf Compliance Editor, right?
Yes. Yeah. And the Jamf Compliance Editor, it's pretty cool. Works on not only Mac but also on iOS as well. So definitely take a look at that. It's still, a lot of people are like, oh, is Jamf Compliance Editor dead? No, it actually still serves a purpose specifically for those iOS devices that are out there. So in Jamf Pro 11.16, we released compliance benchmarks. Anybody in the room using compliance benchmarks today? No. Okay, so I'm assuming nobody in the room has Jamf account tied into their Jamf Pro with SSO, and that's probably why. That's a different subject. Yes, that guy over there. Okay, so we did release compliance benchmarks capability. So essentially, this is built right into the Jamf Cloud Console. So you'll see over the next couple months, we're releasing a lot of new stuff within Jamf Pro, like compliance benchmarks and blueprints that are reliant upon a bunch of microservices. And to make all these microservices function and interweave with one another and make it so that we don't have to access 20 different portals, that's where the Jamf account SSO stuff comes in. I will say this, there are improvements coming to Jamf account SSO to make things a lot more easier to set up in the coming weeks. So appreciate your patience with that. I know that's a very hot topic right now in the Mac admins world, but at the end of the day, it's going to make things really easy for anybody who's managing these devices. But what's great with this is it's all contained within Jamf Pro. So we're able to essentially pay attention to our Macs and make it easier to ensure that they're complying with our security measures that we have and our baseline in place. So benchmarks versus baselines. So the benchmark is essentially the security guideline that you're going to use to generate your organization's policy. Your org's policy is the benchmark. So there's a lot of fun stuff that goes into that. But when you're actually building this out in Jamf Pro, you have two different options. So number one, you could have it essentially just do an audit of your environment, and then you could also have it enforce as well. So you might have regulations that state, certain items must be adhered to. You could have different baselines for different use cases within your organization. So you might have someone dealing with customer data or payment information or other PII or production systems, and they might need a different baseline. I might need a different baseline than Dave might need. So when we're creating the baseline for our Cloud Macs, there's essentially two use cases. So the build server is going to be totally automated. There's no GUI interaction at all. It's not around very long, so things like software updates are best handled at creation, and they're not applied retrospectively. There may be some testing required before an update can be applied to that build server to ensure that there aren't any regressions or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think part of this is too, like when we see the some of the test servers more in the GUI as well. That's really a lot of the time where MDM enrollment, especially when there is a user session, whether it's a user or not, comes in. And some of these look very scary to say, why wouldn't I do that? And I promise you that there are reasons here. For example, we went over file vault. That's something that is encryption is handled in a different way. AirDrop, there's no Wi-Fi. Bluetooth, there's no Bluetooth. So these are things that actually will not necessarily can get in the way sometimes, but you just want to make sure that those profiles aren't necessarily scoped to a Mac in the cloud. So as well as the compliance settings on the actual machine, we do have to talk about secrets. Shh. Quietly. So secrets, API credentials, signing identities, certificates, the stuff that hackers want, of course. So you want to make sure to keep something like that very safe. Anyone who does scripting knows that you don't put the password into the script, because you're going to have a bad time in a whole lot of ways. But getting an idea of not only taking this sort of the approach to when it comes to secrets, AWS does also offer, and this is sort of an overarching service called IAM, or Identity Access and Management. And that basically gives you the ability to say very granularly who has access to what. So we'll see in a little bit where that comes into in some of our workflow. But yeah, this is the type of thing where you can be assured, figure out who is accessing machines, making sure that secrets are understand when they're accessed, how by, and of course keep the access as tight as possible. So this is something as well. We can stream telemetry. AWS offers for telemetry coming from the Mac. We have CloudWatch. We also have for API calls and things when it comes to like the AWS console or users doing things, there's CloudTrail. And I think Jamf has some telemetry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So like if anybody's using Jamf Protect out there for endpoint security, we have a bunch of telemetry within that could also be sent out to your SIEM of choice. So yeah, so taking a look at static inventory data against what you get from, as an example, Jamf Pro can tell you if you're installing apps. So telemetry tells you all the process executions that are being built in and third-party software. Pro will tell you login history. Telemetry uses the full user authentication, including biometric, Apple Watch, etc.
So yeah, this is that question of identity again we're coming back to, because SSH is sort of that first piece of, okay, how am I configuring this? But a lot of the time we do want the GUI access, and that's that really is a question of kind of what is this Mac kind of how should this look for someone connecting via remote access? So then really looking at that network access player, is everything compliant?
Yep.
So I mentioned too, again, I'm not to harp on identity and access management, but it really is sort of this underlying permission system that does make AWS work the way it does. And that's including also things like virtual private cloud, or VPC, which in plain language is that's your network, or your big network. And yeah, allowing things like Jamf verified or Amazon verified access to work with Jamf Trust. In addition, the network extensions that you're able to push after the MDM enrollment. So let's put it all together. This is a bit of a diagram of how I've got the Jamf MDM enrollment going on EC2 Mac. We're going to start with our instance. And this is spinning up a script called enroll EC2 Mac. It had a cleverer name once upon a time, but code names don't always survive copyright. So what this is going to is the script is going to tell the instance, I need access to this secret. And it's going to say, okay, well, who are you, and do you really have the authority? So I attach what's called an instance profile, and that gives the access to this instance specifically to my secret here. This secret in this case is credentials for the instance and for the Jamf API. That gets passed back to the script, and the script then reaches out to the Jamf Pro server for well, I guess it's technically two API calls, because one is to get the token, and then the other is create invitation. Taking that invitation code, it actually will bring that back into the script. The script assembles that into an XML MDM enrollment profile and gets this managed with two-way communication with all of the normal things that you would expect from a managed Mac. So let's take a look at this in action. This is actually going to be the entirety of the process. So right now I'm going through the setup phase. If I were first getting started with this, all I've done is I made an AWS Secrets Manager secret, and I stored that with those API credentials and the credentials for this machine. it's actually checking that the first time it launches. And now it's just going to ask me a couple of, it's going to pass me a few prompts. First for, in our case, we're going to be controlling system settings using system events. And we're also going to need accessibility permissions. This is then going to take just a moment. The screen used to flash a bunch when it did this, but what it's doing here is ensuring that if there's a single helper apps called CLI Click that's installed, and just to make sure that it has all its permissions, it gives me that OK. It's important to click OK here. That actually does make a change to the launch agent and kind of makes it ready to get basically ready to go. So at this stage, I would go into my AWS console or CLI and do a create image. So the image, when it boots, is going to look like this. Logging out and logging in basically is kind of that same, it's going to fire off the same launch agent. And this is very much nothing up our sleeve, nothing, no one's actually touching the machine. And this also, when I mentioned you have that image, when you deploy that image, one of the last steps in this script can be enable external login, enable VNC or anything that you have. So this way, if something doesn't complete that enrollment, probably shouldn't be accessible to anyone. But you can see here, we've got a whole bunch of profiles and are basically ready to go on management. So yeah, I think the most important thing here is really to keep in mind that workflows. There's a lot of different ones. You do want to make sure that you match kind of your use case to. I don't know if rhythm is the right word, but yeah, it really comes down to a lot of using the right tool for the right job. And to be honest, like I said, I started about 3 years ago. I didn't get a chance to spend as much time with EC2 Mac until I finally got here. And I'm just kind of going, okay, this is for testing bare metal. It's been pretty useful for me, at the very least when I'm not trying to break it. So these are just a couple of the resources we were talking about, where just on the SCP, and this is the GitHub for getting started with EC2 Mac instances. And I do want to open things up for questions, because yeah, this is very much a session. This may be a sponsor session, but there's a whole lot that goes into to this sort of thing. So yeah, if there's anything you'd like to understand better, all right, throw a hand up.
Anybody brave enough to catch?
I was going to say, nice. You're going to beat them.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around that enrollment workflow. So It sounds like you run that setup script, you give all the proper permissions to OSA script, and then that's where you stop. Yeah. So you shut down, you make an AMI from that, and then that's the AMI you use for your new instances. And then on first login, you kind of do like the keystroke events to automate that enrollment from there?
Basically, yes. It's there's definitely a decent bit of awareness in the script where it's at. So this way, it's sort of like if somebody decided to move the system settings window a couple of pixels, it's not going to make a difference to that.
Okay, so it's really, it's Apple's fault really that has to be the way it is, right? So that's kind of the workaround you found to make this automated. So the idea is that when you spin up a new, in my case, it'd be like a CI/CD runner. I don't have to do a lot of work to make that happen. I log in for the first time, and the enrollment just automatically goes. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's exactly the idea.
Awesome. That's kind of what I was looking for. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Hey, I've never touched EC2 Mac yet. Can you just expand a little bit more about how the image works? Because obviously Macs aren't normally imageable things.
Yeah, we are definitely looking at something a little out of the ordinary when it comes to, we're using images. So what's happening with the AMI, it is something where when the disk is, you can imagine sort of this image is being plugged in kind of, and when that's mounted on a new on a new Mac. There's a couple of small caveats. Things like disk ownership is not done by default. That actually is something that that can be done if you wanted to do in-place software upgrades specifically. But the oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I guess is the startup drive literally an external drive?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that's how you're facilitating it. It's connected to an external storage, and that's the target OS that it boots up to.
Exactly.
Now it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
The SSD is there, and there is actually an API also, and it's in the console too, where if you look at a host, you can see the latest versions of macOS it's able to run. So that's something that also, when you stop or terminate an instance, it goes through what's called a scrubbing process. And it's a bit of a lengthy process, but it's one that you're not charged during the time for. And it also is doing things like firmware updates and making sure that you're kind of on the latest and greatest, or at the very least latest that we're at, which is typically within a few weeks of the greatest.
Cool.
Awesome.
Kind of maybe outside this presentation, but I'm curious about your certification process for new OS versions. So like Amazon provides stock AMIs for new OS releases,
Yep.
and it's pretty fast. Like we get them pretty quickly. Like, what does that process look like? Like, what do you do to actually certify those?
To be perfectly honest, it's not my team. Isn't the doesn't make the AMIs. It's a team I work with for sure. Probably the most important thing, of course, is does everything work? And if it doesn't, let's make sure that it does. There definitely have been times where sometimes there is like a bug that just makes it so that this version is either not working. Typically, what happens in that case is either there's a point release that's already been released, or we basically just work and make sure that that's fixed. But there's a decent bit of communication going on between that team and Apple directly, as far as I know. So yeah, that's it's definitely as the process goes. I wish I could tell you I have more insight into it. I just know that it's pretty thorough.
That's fine. So like we're talking about images, which is crazy. Talking about images in
Yeah.
2025, but I think the answer is yes. But can we create our own like base images? Like, can we take stock macOS and then install what we want and create an image from there?
You'll have to start from an AWS image,
Okay.
but you can do your own from there. Everything like derivative from that is basically all good to go.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much for
thank you.
joining us. This was always a good time. And yeah, I think
Yeah, enjoy the rest
Yeah.
of the conference.
Slides will be available.
they will be, yes. Thanks.